Yeah, I'm Rami Ismail. I'm one half of Dutch independent studio Vlambeer. We're best known for games like Super Crate Box, Ridiculous Fishing, Luftrousters, and we're currently working on Nuclear Throne.
Nuclear Throne, it's coming to Vita.
Yes.
When is it coming to Vita?
So the way it works is it is currently in early access on PC, Mac, and Linux, and we update the game weekly. It's really hard to do something like that on console or handheld platforms due to certification and bureaucracy, stuff like that. So the way it's going to work is when the game hits version 1.0, when it's ready for release, we'll also try to rapidly have it out on PlayStation Vita.
Okay, and so is the PlayStation Vita version going to be constantly updated as well?
So that's kind of the problem that we have is on handheld, that's an almost impossible thing to do. A game very often stays in certification or review for 2 or 3 weeks. So weekly reviews is just not a possibility. So we want to get the game to the point where we don't have to update with that frequency, and instead the updates can focus on either larger things or bug fixes, and we just do those in time when we have the opportunity to, instead of having a really strict schedule like we do now.
Okay, so for those that haven't heard of Nuclear Throne, what's the game about?
So Nuclear Throne is a top-down roguelike about mutants in a post-apocalyptic world, and that might be the most indie pitch you can do right now. It's a game we've been working on for a while. And it's mostly a very fast action game. If you really like action games, if you like top-down shooters, that's effectively what it is. But it mixes in a lot of ideas from roguelike. So it's procedurally generated. You don't really know what you have to deal with. So instead of memorizing levels, instead of memorizing strategies, you have to adapt to the cards you get dealt, and then figure out how to play with that. It's really, really fast. It's brutal. It's not a simple game. We've people that have played for over 300 hours that still haven't even seen the final boss yet. Mm-hmm. So there's quite a bit of content, but mostly like earning that content had to feel worthwhile. We really wanted that to be an achievement. So it's just really hard.
So when I think of Vlambeer games, I kind of see you guys as the modern arcade game makers.
Thank you.
I sort of see your games as I almost feel like you're a developer out of like 30 years out of time. I feel like you should be making games for Midway in the 80s arcade. So is this kind of a what are the influences of it? Is there a Robotron in here or?
No, not really. Like I mean there is obviously there's things from our past in that game, but we really tried to make games without using other games as inspiration. So Nuclear Throne is more inspired by really bad science fiction books from the 70s, and right. Obviously like arcade is sort of what we do. JW, my colleague, is exceptional at getting like a game to feel visceral and like powerful. We've learned and like gotten better at creating really tight feedback loops so that when you die you just go back in and go again, and when you shoot something it feels nice, when you pick a mutation it feels significant. Like that sort of stuff is sort of what we do, and that is very much inspired by the ideals of arcade games. Just without arcade games had to be hard because they needed you to throw in more coins, so they needed you to die. We don't necessarily need to do that, but the interesting thing about arcade is that it also meant that your achievement, if you could do it on like the further you could get on a single coin, the more impressive it was. So there was like a sense of achievement that we feel is kind of lost.
So I mean, talking about platforms and talking about constantly feeding a game money, mobile clearly is a space where that happens, and yet there's no version so far coming to mobile of Nuclear Throne.
Yeah.
So. And yet, the sort of the free to play model itself is very much that coin feeding mentality. And obviously, with Ridiculous Fishing, you very clearly went away from the free to play stuff. And there were critics who said maybe this should have been that. Are you kind of staunchly anti free to play?
So the question isn't necessarily whether I'm free to play. I think because I'm not anti free to play. I'm not against free to play. I'm against the current implementations of free to play. I think the way free to play is done in a lot of games on mobile now is exploitative. Is like not a word that I think is overreaching. I think I think a lot of it also goes against what I believe are the fundamentals of video games, like the idea that, you know, you could pay to skip certain things. Just makes me feel like we're making games so that people can play them, not so that they can pay money not to have to play them. Like there's just something that fundamentally differs between making that sort of game and making the kind of game we do.
So what do you feel as a creator is going to change that model for the better? Is it going to take more exciting free-to-play creators, or?
I think so. I think what you're seeing right now is a lot of people are experimenting with business models, not because they see an opportunity to make lots of money, but because they see an opportunity to just like play around with how that works. Like there are arguments that you could make for free-to-play. Like a lot of people ask, like, "But isn't it fair to let people at least try before they pay?" And it's like, that sounds really fair. Yeah, sure. So what we usually do is we have an old version of the game available that people can play, and if they like that, then you know you can buy the game and play it. So there's arguments for free to play that are absolutely correct. It's just that the way people do it now is like pay to not play or pay to win or pay to, and it's like that's the opposite of what I would like to do.
Yeah, it's kind of boring, I suppose. Like it almost feels like creatively bankrupt to make a game about that is essentially just to make the money.
Yeah, no, the way I always think of it is that the best design, and this is not just applied to video games, this applies to everything, is not when you can't add more to it, it's when you can't cut away things anymore, right? You want to be the best version of the game possible. Now, to do something like free-to-play, what you need to do is you need to make the best version of your game possible and then make it worse, so people can pay to make it that version again, right? So people are aware that what they are giving people isn't the optimal version of the game, and that's a necessity for a model like that. But that, for us, having a lot of people play a suboptimal version of our game feels like betraying what we're doing, right?
So to come back to that point then, like talking about a slightly suboptimal version of a game, obviously you're talking about Nuclear Throne being a game that's constantly updated, it has all of those things, and yet with major console platforms there isn't that opportunity to have all of those updates. Do you see the console, perhaps even the Vita version, as not the version of Nuclear Throne?
So I think when we get there, when we get to the 1.0, it will be that version, because we're not releasing on those platforms unless we have that version, right? But I do really think that there's a huge opportunity for console there, and you know, something like early access has shown that you can't just entrust every developer with the responsibility of putting a game on a platform that isn't done and then expecting them to finish it. Like we've seen that over and over, that developers abandon games that people have paid for, that people deliver actually broken builds. Like early access should not be a platform where people pay to be a beta tester, right? Like beta testing is a paid profession in our industry, right? That's not something you don't pay for the honor of beta testing. Like for Nuclear Throne, it's honestly that we think the game is solid and that it's good, but that it can be better, and we need different eyes on the game to do that. Like recently we realized that our community is just too good at the game, so we actually ended up doing a big promotion where everybody that had bought the game got a free copy of the game to give to a friend that they thought would give good feedback. We just literally asked our community, like, can you do that? And things like that, things that feel very much 2014, 2015, just aren't possible on consoles yet. Like something like early access, like consoles obviously have a stricter version of quality control than a lot of other platforms do. So for example on Vita, it would be really good to have a similar system where people can push updates rapidly, right? Like that shouldn't be a process that takes 3 weeks, especially not with Android and iOS. On Android, your updates being instantly, on iOS, like going through in a week. And in PlayStation Vita, you receiving a booklet that's about this thick with rules of what your game has to apply to.
Is that frustrating to you as a creator?
I mean, it is frustrating. I get it. Like these companies are huge companies that are in many ways very archaic, and I know they're working on it. Like we're talking to them about Nuclear Throne, about our frustrations with certain parts of the development process. But on the one hand, you get an environment that is slower, that's more archaic. On the other hand, it's also a platform that doesn't have a lot of the issues that you get on iOS or Android.
Sure.
So they have benefits, there's advantages and disadvantages. It's just, at this point, I think that there are opportunities that that would improve experiences on Vita, on 3DS, just on the handheld market, that would just be a minor update of how things work now.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the current state of games and the future. You were on a very big indie pitch panel. You were judging some of the entrants. I guess first of all, did you see anything there that was particularly mind blowing? And second of all, was it a good representation of where you sort of see indie games at the moment, or is it much more kind of?
I mean, yes and no. So the interesting thing is, indie is in a very strange place at the moment. Like it's very hard to still say indie, because one of the interesting things that has happened over the past 5 to 8 years is that the industry has grown so much, has become so broad, includes so many experiences, perspectives, ideas, motivations, that you can feel it fragment, like it's fragmenting almost violently. Like all these different pockets of the games industry start to exist, and indie is very much one of those pockets that's fragmenting. Like some independent developers are moving to like sort of a double A location. People like Mike Biddle working on something like Volume, or Capybara working on Below. Those are not the same indies that we talk about when we talk about Michael Bro working on like 868 Hack or Zaga, or smaller people, smaller developers working on Twine games that are fascinating, but they're just not the same thing. You can't really say they're the same thing either.
Yeah, of course.
So the indie pitch was interesting. I saw a bunch of really, really good stuff. There was a game called Progress that actually ended up winning, that I was extremely impressed by. It was such a good use of the game's context, like on the iPad, and like basically using all the functionality on the iPad without feeling like it was shoehorned in. There was another game called Magic Flute. Magic Flute. I was very impressed by, because the visual style was very, very striking. They used very bright blues and pinks. But the game is actually inspired by a opera play, a Mozart opera play. And they basically translated the set from that opera into a game. And it's a very progressive set. It's a sort of a grid cube. But making that into an actual video game is very interesting. And it's a game that has tremendous potential. And I'd love to, see that work out. So I'm going to keep my eyes on that one.
Okay, and finally, you were talking about the indie community sort of fracturing and splintering off.
Yeah.
Obviously, late 2014, early 2015 still, there is a lot of fracturing going on within the game space at the moment. And you're a very vocal, you're a very sort of vocal personality on Twitter and other social media and in the space itself about the culture of games, I suppose. Would you say there's a specific thing at the moment going on within the games community at large that really needs to be addressed at the moment?
Obviously, the fracturing has good things, it has bad things. Good things are, for example, the Twine space, growing to have its own heroes, its own thought leaders, its own methods of reaching out, of getting the people that want to play those games to play those games. It's creating its own subspace, its own subculture. It's very much a part of games, but also has its own way of growing independently of the industry. And that's a good example. A bad example is, for example, something like Gamergate, the controversy that has been sort of ravaging through the industry, where a part of the industry, a group of gamers that has very specific views of the industry, just basically kinda don't want the other views involved in what they see as right. And you see certain, you see the allegations of certain, media like Shift, like Kotaku is something that tries to cover all of games, and that just means that they obviously have to include stuff that their former audiences don't necessarily enjoy, and the violent response to that is obviously a negative, is obviously a bad thing. So there are challenges, and I think a lot of these will go away over time. These are things that will eventually, this will just be the new status quo. It's just that while these things are happening, it's something we need to be really aware of and keep talking about and keep calling out when something terrible happens, because it would be terrible to see so many good game developers, game designers just be afraid of making video games. We should not be in a space where game developers are afraid of making games, or players are afraid of playing games. Like, this should be a safe space.
Brilliant. Thank you.